Hello and welcome to Likhawat. I'm Gautam Chaube, your host, and this is a show about the books of Bharat. The book this week is Bonding with the Lord.
Lord Jagannath is a symbol of Odisha and the Odia way of life. Few other Hindu gods guide a regional consciousness, shape everyday life, and define a collective psyche the way Lord Jagannath does in Odisha. Bonding with the Lord focuses on the material and everyday practices through which people connect with Jagannath and make sense of his many layered presence in their lives. Some of these practices are devotional music, cinema, prasad culture, festivals, as well as construction of Jagannath temples in places like Delhi, Agartala and Chennai, among others. Professor Jyotirmaya Tripathy, the editor of the book, is a member of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. His areas of interest are cultural studies and contemporary India, particularly debates around culture and development. Professor Tripathy also writes for newspapers and magazines, mostly around the questions of culture and identity. Some of the anthologies he has edited are The Democratic Predicament, Becoming Minority, and Bonding with the Lord.
और आज हमारे साथ स्टूडियो में हैं इस किताब के एडिटर प्रोफेसर ज्योतिर्मय त्रिपाठी. Professor Tripathi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gautam. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Let's start with where it all starts, the story of Jagannath. और जैसा कि मुझे लगता है कि हर कहानी की तरह इस कहानी की भी कई परतें होंगी, कुछ लोक मान्यताएं, कुछ इतिहास. So take us through the story of Jagannath's arrival in Puri and in Odisha.
Okay, Gautam. So let's start. But before I proceed formally, let me have a couple of clarifications. Number one is that, as you rightly mentioned, this is an anthology and it is edited by my colleague Uva Skoda, who works at Aarhus University of Denmark. I am the co-editor. And there are 11 chapters in this book. So this is a collaborative project. And this book belongs to all of them as it belongs to me. So that is out of the way now. Let me tell you that आप उड़ीसा में किसी को भी पूछ लीजिए कि जगन्नाथ का ओरिजिन क्या है, कितने पुराने हैं ये, तो लोग बोलेंगे कि ये तो सदियों से हैं, इनका ना कोई आदि है ना कोई अंत है. तो मतलब ये होता है कि when we talk about Jagannath, time and timelessness, phenomenal and nominal, what is tribal and what is mainstream Hindu, they all morph into each other and they get fused into each other, right? So you may say that legends and myths, they lose themselves in history, and history perhaps finds itself in legend and in myths. If you talk about Puranic literature, Skanda Purana is the one which has quite a large portion on the Utkala Khanda, particularly the Purushottam Mahatmya, right? Where there are many references to Daru Brahma and so on and so forth. But that's not the only Purana, right? So there are other Puranas, like even before Skanda Purana there is Brahma Purana. So Brahma Purana also mentions Purushottam, etc. And there are a few others as well. But the most important character in this episode is someone called Indradyumna, who we believe ruled sometime in the Satya Yuga, right? And he once had a dream. And he saw that Nilamadhava, the earlier form of Jagannath, is being worshipped somewhere in Odradesa. And then he sends his, the brother of his chief priest, his name is Vidyapati. So he comes, and by the way, Indradyumna is the king of Malab, which is today we may say it's Malwa, right? And where exactly was this Nilachala where Nilamadhava was worshipped? we can always debate whether it was exactly in Puri, somewhere around Puri, or whether it was somewhere in central Odisha. It's a little debatable, I would say. But it's also a fact that there is a Madhava temple not far from Puri. We can make a calculated guess that perhaps that is the original one, but again, there is no concrete evidence to establish that. So, coming back to the topic, we have Vidyapati landing in the Sabar territory, and the king Vishwavasu, the chieftain, the tribal chief, he is the one who knows the access to Nilamadhava. Somehow through guile, trickery, whatever you may call it, or you may say through persuasion, Vidyapati somehow convinces Vishwavasu to take him near Nilamadhava, which finally he manages to do. And then Indradyumna gets the information. Indradyumna comes, there are many details I am actually skipping. So Indradyumna comes to see Nilamadhava, and he does, but Nilamadhava disappears. Again, there will be variations in details. So once he is upset and he starts meditating and arranges a Aswamedh Yajna, Narad comes with an idol of Narasimha,
Right.
and Narasimha becomes, you may say, the first Purushottama. But soon afterwards, Indradyumna had another dream where he sees that a sacred log or daru, which is basically a tree trunk, will be washed ashore somewhere in Puri, and the three deities or plus Sudarshan Chakra. So these deities have to be carved out of this log. But he finds it really difficult to find someone who can actually pull it out. It is that heavy. Again, you can read many layers of meaning into that. But then he sees that there is an old person who suddenly appears from nowhere and promises the king that he can actually do the job. The only condition is that he will be closeted somewhere and nobody will have access to that room or that hall or whatever. And once the idols are ready, he can come out. After a few days, interestingly, since he was an old man and no sound was audible after a couple of days, then everybody got a little anxious, and then they broke open the door. And when they broke open the door, they found the Maharana or the carpenter missing, and the three idols in this incomplete set. So that is basically the story of that. This is legend. When we come to the actual temple, the temple as we see it in Puri was actually built in 12th century by the Ganga Bangsi kings, and perhaps the one who started it is Anantavarman Chodaganga Deva, and it was completed by his son Anagabhim Dev. But much before the Ganga Bangsis came, there are other dynasties who also worshipped Jagannath, if not in the present temple that we see today. So there is evidence available that even from 7th century till 10th century, we had Jagannath temple somewhere in Puri, but we exactly don't know where. So there are references to Saludbhavas, there are references to Bhaumakaraj who also worshipped Jagannath. So that's in a nutshell about the legend and the history of Jagannath temple.
बात करते हैं इस किताब के टाइटल की, बॉन्डिंग विद द लॉर्ड. एंड वन गेट्स द सेंस दैट दिस बुक इज़ अबाउट एन इंटीमेट बॉन्ड बिटवीन द डेटी एंड द डिवोटी. भक्त और आराध्य के बीच की जो आत्मीय संबंध है, शायद ये किताब उसके बारे में है, या शायद ये किताब भक्ति कविता के बारे में है, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं है. दिस बुक इन फैक्ट टेक्स यू बियॉन्ड द ट्रोप ऑफ intimacy and looks at the way in which Jagannath circulates in the popular culture. So tell us a bit about the design of the book and what inspired you to pursue this subject.
Okay, so far as the title is concerned, I think the credit should go to my collaborator, Professor Uvas Koda. It was in fact his idea and I grabbed it with both the hands. So, so far as the structure is concerned, or rather let me take you back to the whole question of bhakti. In the Vaishnavite tradition, Krishna or Jagannath is a Madhurya deity. He is not a Aishwarya deity. He is not usually seen as someone who is really powerful or a marauding force or anything of that kind. He is a very intimate person that you can actually bond with. You can imagine him to be son, to be father, to be friend, anything. So being an Aishwarya deity, he can be imagined in many forms. And as you know, there can be nothing in between the Bhakta and the Bhagavan, right? But what we have done, we have actually gone a little beyond that particular dimension of Bhakti, and we are opening up the whole space. It is not simply between the Bhakta and the Bhagavan. There are a range of emotions which can get aided, which can be sustained by many material objects, by many images, by many experiences, by everyday life, rituals, practices, whether it is fasting, whether it is osa, bara, cinema, cassettes, pravachanas, and so on and so forth. Usually very few people actually talk about this. But interestingly, this culturalist dimension, these everyday dimensions of Jagannath practice are the actual ones which keeps our interest in Jagannath going, right? So we thought, why not make these topics a subject of academic scrutiny? For example, how do we expand this whole question of Jagannath scholarship, Jagannath subjectivity, right? It's not simply the Bhakt who can be a Jagannath subject. One who is selling Mahaprasad, one who is consuming Mahaprasad, right. Somebody who is selling a cassette, somebody who is buying that cassette, right? So these are important parts of Jagannath practice and we wanted to capture that.
Right. It is said that the temple in Puri is a melting pot for many sects and identities both in Odisha and beyond. In fact, Jagannath खुद कभी नारायण के रूप में पूजे जाते हैं, कभी शिव के रूप में और कभी गणपति के रूप में. So how do you look at Puri and this particular temple in Puri as a site of convergence?
ना बिल्कुल आपने सही बोला. So far as Indic religions are concerned, and when we say that यहाँ पे सर्व धर्म का समन्वय होता है, क्या मतलब होता है इसका? इसका मतलब ये होता है कि there are so many different sects, there are so many different paramparas even within India, within different sects inside India, in different religions. All of them have found their God in Jagannath. देखिए, जो गंगा वंशीज थे, जो आज का जो मंदिर आप देखते हैं जिसको जो बनाए थे, they were not Jagannath devotees originally, they were actually Saivites, right? Similarly, before that, Bhaumakaraj were actually Buddhists. Before that, we have Sayudbhavas, they were also Saivites and Sakta worshippers. Similarly, we have references to Guru Nanak Dev, Guru Shankar Dev, Guru Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. All these people have actually come and found their God in Jagannath. In fact, when Chaitanya comes to Puri, his experience, as you can imagine, is definitely very, very complex because there are multiple dimensions to his arrival in Puri. Some also look at him with suspicion, but he very categorically, in many places, he says that he can actually liquefy. Okay, and when we look at other religions, non-Indic religions, it becomes a little more complex, and we have to confront that head on. Does it mean that Jagannath's appeal is limited only to Indic religions? To a large extent, yes. But at the same time, there is a sizable number of devotees, singers, believers who also come from different non-Indic religions. Salabega, for example, there are quite a few more as well. Now, I don't know whether you have heard something called Patita Pavana. Usually we think Patita Pavana refers to that bana which is fluttering at the top of the temple. But Patita Pavana is actually also a painting just immediately after crossing the Singhadwara.
This is in the temple?
Immediately after the Arunastambha, once you enter.
Right.
So, this was done to give a sense of purpose, a sense of satisfaction to a king called Ramachandra Dev. And remember, in Jagannath cult, the king is always the first Rauta or the first servitor.
Right.
Right? In fact, let me just take a little digression here. When Ganga Vangshis started expanding their territory in Odisha, they made Jagannath the Rashtra Devata. He was not simply a personal god, right? So he was the god of the Rashtra. Okay. So Jagannath becomes the manifestation or embodiment of the Rashtra. So much so that if you say a few things against the king, it's almost like saying things against Jagannath himself, because the king is the first Rauta of Jagannath. So imagine in such a scenario, you have a king called Ramachandra Dev who actually marries a Muslim girl and hence is denied entry into the temple. Right? Imagine he is the king and he cannot even get access to the temple. So to make him feel belong, this Patita Pavana image that you see today was created because of that. So it is a complex issue, I do acknowledge, but so far as, again let me repeat that whether it is Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, even Buddhists, even Tantra worshippers, they see Jagannath as Bhairava, right? There are many tantric elements. There look at the prevalence of the image of elephant, so that takes us quite close to Jainism. So Buddhists see him as Buddha, Jainas see him as Jina, right? Tantra worshippers see him as Bhairava, and Guru Nanak Dev found him as Vaheguru, right? So this is a fascinating tale.
Absolutely. Something you pointed earlier in the discussion today, that Jagannath is a part of the teeming everyday in Odisha. एकदम किसी परिवार के सदस्य की तरह हैं, जिनसे हम प्रेम भी करते हैं, जिन पे हम नाराज़ भी होते हैं, जिन्हें बुखार भी होता है और उनके लिए डॉक्टर भी आते हैं. So tell us more about this humanizing of the Lord.
Tumeva mata cha pita tumeva bandhu cha sakha tumeva. So that is exactly, that more or less captures how an Odia or anybody who believes in Jagannath imagines Jagannath. There are many stories, there are many cinemas, there are many novels depicting Jagannath in this intimate form. For example, movies like Puo Mora Kala Thakura, Jagahatere Pagha, Bandhu Mahanti, Dasya Bauri. So Jagannath has been imagined in various forms. I would say that among the tropes used for Jagannath, the idea of Jagannath as a son is perhaps most popular and most enduring, I would say. And quite a few movies have been made. So yes, it is absolutely true that Jagannath has an intimate relationship with the devotees, and like any child actually, like any son for that matter, he needs a lot of care, lot of attention, a lot of pampering actually. He loves food, in fact quite a lot of food, with lots of varieties of food as well, and he can also take bath, and he can also fall sick, and he has to be nursed back. In fact, he demands to be nursed back. And if you look at the list of the servitors, you don't have to really go anywhere beyond the website of the Jagannath temple itself, where you shall find a huge list of servitors who actually offer their services to the temple and to Jagannath and the Balabhadra and Subhadra. So when he falls sick, so he has to be nursed back, and there are many stories and songs associated with that as well. So again, I mean, you are absolutely right there that this is part of everyday life insofar as Odia's life world is concerned.
Lord Jagannath is the Lord of the world, and yet uniquely territorial. हम देखते हैं कि उड़ीसा में जितने भी मंदिर हैं या पुरी में जितने भी मंदिर हैं, उनमें सबसे खास जगन्नाथ जी का मंदिर है पुरी में. There are chapters in the book which in fact talk about how Jagannath is explored, how Jagannath engages with Odia diaspora in cities like Delhi, in Chennai, in Tripura. Tell us about the significance of Jagannath to the Odia diaspora. प्रवासियों के लिए जगन्नाथ के क्या मायने हैं?
बिल्कुल, ये तो बहुत अच्छी सवाल आपने पूछी. देखिए, जैसे कि मैंने बोला कि ये जो बॉन्डिंग है बहुत इंटीमेट बॉन्डिंग होता है. तो इसका मतलब ये हो जाता है कि जगन्नाथ प्रैक्टिस का मतलब सिर्फ ये नहीं कि आप मंदिर को जाओ, प्रसाद खा लो, वापस आ जाओ, बस हो गया. ये एक एवरीडे प्रेजेंस है. जगन्नाथ इज एन एवरीडे प्रेजेंस. सो यू गो टू एनी ओडियाज होम, you just can't, he's an unmissable presence. And in the book, this has been highlighted in more than one chapter. जैसे कि मैंने बताया कि मूवीज़ के ऊपर एक चैप्टर है जो कैसे how Jagannath is imagined as son and so on and so forth. Similarly, how pravachana as a particular type of religious discourse with a style of its own, which is very popular in different parts of the country, equally in Odisha. So that is also very, very popular so far as discourses on Jagannath are concerned. Coming to the ethnicity and territorialization of Jagannath, हाँ, ये तो बिल्कुल सही है कि एक टेरिटोरियल डायमेंशन है कि वो पुरी के हैं, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा ओडिशा के हैं, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा वो कल्चर रीजन के हैं, और फिर मान लो कि एक धाम भी है, 4 धाम से एक है, सारा देश के हैं, राइट. बट द फैक्ट ऑफ द मैटर इज दैट ही इज ऑल्सो कॉल्ड जगन्नाथ, व्हिच मीन्स ही इज जगतरनाथ, right, the Lord of the universe. So how do we reconcile this contradiction? There is, I will not say a contradiction, perhaps it's a paradox. But inbuilt into Jagannath practice, again, I mean, just to give a background, Jagannath is in a kshetra. He is there in Puri. That's the seat of his authority, like any other dham is.
From which he commands all of Odisha.
All of Odisha, and possibly the
rest
whole
of the world too.
But let me also add, Gautam, here, that there are also temples. In fact, I have been to one of them. Chasing a Jagannath temple in North Kerala, I discovered that it's actually Shiva temple. And when I actually spoke to the priest as to how this is called Jagannath and yet still Shiva is worshipped, he said, yeah, I mean, Shiva is the Nath. Whenever we talk about Nath or Ishwar, we talk about Shiva in different forms of Shiva. So this is how he is imagined. So this is fascinating, right? So now coming to the moving or the traveling dimension of Jagannath. Remember, Jagannath was not exactly in the same place. He came from elsewhere. He came from the Sabbar territory to Puri, right? And Jagannath has also been deployed, imagined, I mean there is no historical evidence as such, but in many secular literatures, Jagannath is also seen to be moving out of Odisha to help the Gajapati king conquer another territory. Right. For example, in the Kanchi Kabiri legend, Jagannath comes, both Jagannath and Balabhadra come out of the temple and go up to Kanchipuram to help the Gajapati king. But the beauty is that after defeating Kanchipuram and bringing the, again this is a totally entirely another story, I don't want to elaborate on that, but the fascinating dimension is that when even after conquering Kanchipuram, they also bring back the Kanchi Ganesha, because Padmavati, the princess who is also brought with Kanchi Ganesha, could not have lived without that Kanchi Ganesha, because there was an intimate again bonding between Padmavati and Kanchi Ganesha. Now that Kanchi Ganesha is still worshipped in Jagannath temple. It is still there and it is still known as Kanchi Ganesha. You can't miss it. So since travel and movement is associated with Jagannath, it is quite clear that naturally people when they go out, when they move out, because the modern times demand travel, because you go, you immigrate, you go for work and so on and so forth. जिस प्रवासी उड़िया हो, प्रवासी भारतीय हो, तो हम जब जाते हैं तो we also try to recreate our little territories there. So we ethnicize that territory. So we take our gods, we take our goddesses, we take their murtis and imagine that we are living in our own homeland. Right? So that way it gives, particularly in a civilization which is non-Abrahamic, this adds a fascinating dimension that you can actually take the god to any place and that becomes the sacred land.
Right. पुरी का मंदिर अपने महाप्रसाद के लिए भी प्रसिद्ध है. भगवान को जैसा आपने ही कहा 56 भोग चढ़ाए जाते हैं. And even at the Jagannath temple here in Delhi, one can actually taste a slice of Odisha's culinary delights. Do you also see Jagannath as the custodian of Odisha's food culture? क्या उड़ीसा की जो निरामिष खाद्य संस्कृति है, भोजन संस्कृति है, क्या उसको भी जगन्नाथ एक सूत्र में बांधते हैं?
This is an interesting dimension actually. I have not really thought so much about it, but thanks for bringing this. जैसे कि मैंने बोला कि being an intimate god, you can actually carry him anywhere. And the book has close to 3 chapters talking about that, whether it is Jagannath in Delhi,
right,
Jagannath in Chennai, Jagannath in Agartala. And Jagannath can also create different types of communities, which is not necessarily religious or spiritual. In fact, it can actually be an academic community. One chapter by Uwe Skoda, the last chapter, actually talks about that how the ORP researchers themselves suddenly became Jagannath subjects.
ORP is
Odisha Research Project, which was funded by German Research Council twice, and they did fascinating work actually. So they started gifting one another with different types of memorabilia associated with Jagannath practice. So that is again a fascinating dimension. And that brings us to the food culture, right? This is all connected. And let me again add here that the Mahaprasad that we conventionally understand cannot be expanded beyond vegetables which are not procured locally.
Right.
So for example, tomato can never be part of Mahaprasad because those vegetables were brought from outside, right? So the traditional, the standard fare would be mostly anna, dali, besara, mahura, kanika, khiri and so on and so forth. And also lots of sweets. Jagannath also likes sweets.
Chena podo, chena gojo.
And rasogolla.
Rasogolla.
So naturally when people move out of that place, they try to recreate that Jagannath land or home in another territory which they earlier thought is not their own. But with Jagannath's presence, they can actually re-sacralize it and they can call that place their own. And naturally, how do you create a space of your own if not through food? So food becomes an important part of experiencing Jagannath. Umashankar Patra has done fascinating work in this anthology when he shows that how the material and the sacral, they need not be really seen as opposites. In fact, it is through the material, particularly the food culture, you can also experience the sacral. And in many temples outside of Puri, you can see that the menu gets expanded. In fact, they can serve you paneer, they can serve you potol and so on and so forth. They can serve you different other types of sweets which are usually not associated with Jagannath temple. But that expansion and innovation, I would much rather say, in fact, it expands the sphere of Jagannath's influence outside of Puri, outside of Odisha.
Right. There are chapters in this book that deal with bhajan of Jagannath. They are called janana. First part of the question is, how are janana different from other bhajans? And about your own engagement with the project. You're also a devotee and a scholar. I noticed how throughout the book, when you refer to Jagannath, the pronoun he starts with a capital H. तो एक भक्त की आसक्त दृष्टि, एक समाजशास्त्री की तटस्थ ऑब्जेक्टिव दृष्टि, कितना मुश्किल है इन दोनों को अलग रख पाना?
दूसरे वाला क्वेश्चन तो बहुत कठिन सवाल आपने पूछ लिया, तो ठीक है. तो जो पहला वाला जो क्वेश्चन है, bhajan and janan, they are complementary, but there is a subtle difference. In bhajan is like any other regular bhajan where the singer or the performer or the poet usually.
Animesh Mahapatra उसके बारे में बात.
Animesh Mahapatra ने has written a very interesting chapter in this book. How janana, a particular bhakti literary tradition, where complaint and lament combined. So basically, in the guise of berating the Lord, he is actually singing his glory. In bhajan, what we say, the root is bhaj, right? So when we sing the glory of the Lord, it's bhajan. But when we sing the glory in the guise of berating him, for example, badhila jani khyama karan ohile rama ramana dande diyatali, and I can go on. Basically, it appears that the poet is very angry and upset with the Lord.
What is the meaning here?
So basically, I mean, if you think that I'm going to hurt you, then so be it. And you are almost like a poisonous snake, and so on and so forth. So that also shows an intimate relationship and the relationship of trust, that I can say anything to Jagannath and I can still get away with that. This is not possible with other gods. Right. And coming to the second question, this is a very methodological question, a substantive question. How do you navigate different pools? The pool of being the faithful, the pool of being an academic. But let me tell you, most of the people, I mean, with my limited understanding of academic world, let me say that some people genuinely believe that there should be a very clear separation between an academic pursuit and a personal experience which is bhakti or which is spirituality. I would like to believe that it's a false binary. Why I believe that it's a false binary? Because this difference between scholarship and faith can be traced back to perhaps enlightenment and colonialism as well, when anything that is not modern is traditional and hence not worthy of pursuing. And in that particular template, a society which is organic, which is pre-modern, doesn't know how to articulate itself. So basically that clears the path for the anthropologist, for the traveler, for the administrator, who are mostly colonizers. So for them to really produce knowledge about the other place. If you look at the whole academic universe, I'm sure you know about English literature as a discipline for that matter. It was not necessarily English literature, but it had a particular colonial dimension to that. The same with anthropology, the same with sociology. So whenever people spoke about European or Western countries' societies, they became sociologists. When they started talking about the third world, they became anthropologists, right? So, but I think there is a response threshold. It's a fine balance. It's a response threshold that we have to maintain. And the moment I feel that my academic pursuit is undermining my faith, I think there has to be some pushback. And that particular condition, perhaps for me, will be difficult to accept.
प्रोफेसर त्रिपाठी, आज आप हमारे बीच आए, आपने जगन्नाथ की सृष्टि, उनकी सत्ता, उनकी संस्कृति से हमें रूबरू करवाया, इतनी सारी ज्ञान की बातें हमसे की. आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers. I'm sure you enjoyed today's episode about Lord Jagannath and the wonderful culture that revolves around him. Meet us next week with a new book, with a new author. Till then, keep watching Sansad TV. I am your host, Gautam Chaube. Namaste.
संसद टीवी के और भी प्रोग्राम्स देखने के लिए सब्सक्राइब करें हमारा यूट्यूब चैनल और हाँ, इन्हें लाइक और शेयर करना ना भूलें.